A woman's father left her $50 million in his will. 3 days after the funeral, her stepmother showed up at the lawyer's office with fake documents, claiming the entire inheritance belonged to her. What this daughter discovered about her stepmother's 20-year plan left everyone absolutely speechless. This is Sarah Mitchell's story, a tale of greed, deception, forgery, and uncovering a truth so dark it would send shockwaves through everyone who knew her family. Before we start the story, leave a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. We love seeing our Deep Stories community growing all around the world. And at the end of this story, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Let us know what you think. If you believe that justice can prevail even when everything seems lost, if you think family legacies are worth fighting for, and if you know that the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This is Sarah Mitchell's journey, a story about inheritance, betrayal, investigation, and learning that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one sleeping under the same roof as your father. Let's begin. The rain came down in sheets that gray October afternoon, turning the cemetery into a landscape of mud and sorrow. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of her father's grave, watching as they lowered the mahogany casket into the earth. She held a single white rose in her trembling hand, the same flower her father used to bring her every year on her birthday since she was a little girl. Robert Mitchell, founder and CEO of Mitchell Technologies, was gone at 68 years old. Heart attack, the doctor said. Sudden, unexpected, tragic. Sarah was 28 now, and she felt like a child again, orphaned and alone in the world. Her mother had died of cancer when Sarah was only 10 years old. That loss had devastated both her and her father. For 5 years, it had been just the two of them against the world. Robert threw himself into his work, building his technology company from a small startup into a billion-dollar empire. But he never neglected Sarah. Every school play, every graduation, every milestone, he was there. Then, when Sarah was 15, Robert married again. Her name was Diane Thompson, a stunning woman with perfect blonde hair, designer clothes, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Diane was 37 at the time, 15 years younger than Robert, and young enough to be considered his trophy wife by the judgmental whispers at country club dinners. Sarah tried to like her. She really did. Her father seemed happy again, and that was what mattered, right? But Diane was always cold to Sarah when Robert wasn't around. There were little comments, subtle digs about Sarah's appearance, her career choices, her lifestyle. Nothing overt enough to complain about, but enough to make Sarah feel unwelcome in her own childhood home. So Sarah moved out at 18, went to college, got her business degree, and built her own life. She visited her father regularly, but she kept her distance from Diane. Now, standing at the funeral, Sarah looked across the grave at her stepmother. Diane stood under a black Chanel umbrella, wearing a perfectly tailored black dress and designer heels that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her makeup was flawless, her hair was perfect, and there wasn't a single tear on her face. Not one. Sarah found that strange. Her father had just died, and his wife of 13 years couldn't manage even one tear. Sarah's face was streaked with rain and tears mixed together. Her eyes were swollen from crying for 3 days straight, but Diane looked like she was attending a boring business meeting, not her husband's funeral. The service ended. People came up to Sarah, offering their condolences, her father's colleagues from the company, old friends from college, neighbors from the estate. Everyone told her how sorry they were, how much her father loved her, how proud he was of everything she'd accomplished. Sarah thanked them numbly, barely hearing their words. Then Diane approached. She didn't hug Sarah. She didn't even touch her. She just looked at her with those cold blue eyes and said in a quiet voice that somehow felt menacing, "We need to talk about your father's estate, soon." Then she walked away, her heels clicking on the wet pavement as she headed to her Mercedes. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the rain. Something in Diane's tone felt wrong, threatening almost. But she pushed the thought away. She was grieving, exhausted, not thinking clearly. Of course, they needed to discuss the estate. Her father had been a wealthy man. There would be legal matters to handle, paperwork to sign, decisions to make about the company. That was normal, right? 3 days later, Sarah received a phone call that would change everything. It was from Richard Morrison, her father's attorney for over 20 years. Richard had been at the funeral, had given a touching eulogy about Robert's integrity and vision. Now his voice on the phone sounded strained, uncomfortable. "Sarah, I need you to come to my office this afternoon. It's about your father's will. There's been a development." A development? What kind of development? Sarah's mind raced. Had her father left instructions she didn't know about? Some specific wishes for his funeral or his company? She arrived at Richard's law office at 2 o'clock. The office was in a historic building downtown, all dark wood and leather chairs and walls lined with legal books. Sarah had been there many times over the years when her father updated his estate planning. She knew the routine. Richard would read the will, she would inherit her father's estate, and she would take over as CEO of Mitchell Technologies, just as her father had always planned. He'd been grooming her for that role since she graduated college. He'd told her 100 times, "Everything I've built is for you, sweetheart. You're my legacy." But when Sarah walked into the conference room, her confidence evaporated. Diane was already there, sitting at the long table with a satisfied smile on her perfectly made-up face. She wore a cream-colored Hermes suit and held a cup of coffee like she didn't have a care in the world. Richard stood at the head of the table, and he looked miserable. "Sarah, please sit down," he said quietly. Sarah sat across from Diane, her heart starting to pound. Something was very, very wrong. Richard opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. He cleared his throat, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. "Sarah, there's no easy way to say this. Your father created a second will approximately 2 months before his death. This will supersede all previous estate planning documents." Sarah's blood went cold. A second will. Why? Her father had never mentioned anything about changing his will. They'd had dinner together just a month before he died, and he'd talked about the future, about Sarah taking over the company, about his retirement plans. He'd said nothing about a new will. "What does it say?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard glanced at Diane, then back at Sarah. "According to this document, which was properly signed, witnessed, and notarized, your father left 80% of his entire estate to Diane. This includes the majority ownership of Mitchell Technologies, the family home, the vacation properties, the investment portfolios, everything. You receive 20% of the estate, which will be held in a trust that you cannot access until you turn 35. That's 7 years from now. Until then, you'll receive a monthly allowance of $10,000 from the trust." The room spun. Sarah gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. "That's insane," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "My father would never do that. Never. He told me everything was set up for me. He was training me to run the company. This doesn't make any sense." Diane leaned forward, her smile growing wider. "Your father loved me, Sarah. In the end, he loved me more than the memory of your mother and more than his obligation to you. He realized I was his true partner, and he wanted to ensure I was taken care of. He also realized, and I'm sorry to be blunt, that you weren't mature enough or capable enough to handle the responsibility of his empire." Sarah felt like she'd been slapped. "How dare you?" Richard interrupted. "Sarah, I understand this is shocking, but I've reviewed the document thoroughly. It's legally binding. The signatures are authentic. The witnesses are credible. The notarization is valid. I wish I had better news, but this is your father's final will and testament." Sarah looked at the document Richard slid across the table. Her father's signature was there at the bottom, along with 2 witnesses she didn't recognize and a notary stamp. It looked official, it looked real, but everything inside her screamed that this was wrong. "Can I contest this?" Sarah asked. Richard hesitated. "You can try, but it would be expensive, time-consuming, and honestly, based on what I'm seeing here, unlikely to succeed." "I'm sorry, Sarah. I truly am." Diane stood up, smoothing her perfect suit. "I think we're done here. Sarah, you'll need to clear your belongings out of any company offices by the end of the week. As the majority owner, I'm making some changes to the executive team. Your position as VP of Development is being eliminated." "You'll receive severance, of course." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. In one moment, she'd lost everything. Her inheritance, her father's company, her job, her future. All of it gone. Given to a woman who'd married her father for his money. Sarah stood on shaking legs and walked out of that office without another word. She made it to her car before the tears came. She sat in the parking garage and cried until she had no tears left, her head resting on the steering wheel, her whole body shaking with sobs. Everything her father had built, everything he'd promised her, everything she'd worked toward, all of it was gone. Taken by Diane with a forged signature and a fake will. Because Sarah was certain now, absolutely certain, that document was a fraud. She didn't know how she knew. She just did. Call it intuition. Call it knowing her father's heart. Call it desperation. But Sarah knew in her bones that her father had never signed that will, which meant Diane had forged it. And if Diane had forged the will, what else had she done? Sarah drove home in a daze, her mind racing with questions and doubts and an anger so deep it felt like fire in her chest. She kept replaying her father's words from their last dinner together. "Everything I've built is yours, sweetheart. You're going to do amazing things with the company. I'm so proud of you." Those were his exact words. A man who says that doesn't turn around 2 weeks later and leave everything to his wife, it didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Diane at the funeral with no tears. Diane in the lawyer's office with that satisfied smile. Diane telling her she wasn't mature enough or capable enough. The anger grew hotter, sharper. At 3 in the morning, Sarah made a decision. She was going to fight this. She was going to find the truth. And she was going to make Diane pay for whatever she'd done. The next morning, Sarah called her father's best friend, Marcus Chen. Marcus had been her father's college roommate, his business partner when they first started Mitchell Technologies, and his closest confidant for 40 years. If anyone knew her father's true intentions, it was Marcus. "Marcus, it's Sarah. I need to talk to you. Can we meet?" Marcus heard something in her voice because he didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'll come to you. Give me 30 minutes. Marcus arrived at Sarah's apartment looking worried. He was a distinguished man in his late 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd known Sarah since she was born, had been like an uncle to her growing up. Sarah made coffee and then told him everything. The second will, the 80-20 split, the trust she couldn't access for 7 years, her job being eliminated, all of it. Marcus listened in silence, but his expression grew darker with every sentence. When Sarah finished, Marcus set down his coffee cup and said very quietly, "Your father never mentioned changing his will. Not once. In fact, Sarah, about 6 weeks ago, your father and I had lunch together. We were talking about the future of the company, and he specifically told me everything was arranged for you. He said, and I quote, 'Sarah is ready. She's brilliant, capable, and kind. She's going to take Mitchell Technologies to heights I never imagined. Everything is set up to ensure she has complete control when I'm gone.'" Those were his exact words. Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes again. "So you believe me? You think the will is fake?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I don't just think it's fake, Sarah. I'm certain of it. Your father loved you more than anything in this world. He would never, and I mean never, leave his life's work to Diane. He knew exactly what she was. Sarah's breath caught. What do you mean he knew what she was? Marcus sighed deeply. About 3 months ago, your father told me he'd made a terrible mistake marrying Diane. He said he'd been lonely after your mother died, and Diane had been charming and attentive, and he'd fallen for an illusion. But over the past year, he'd started seeing through the facade. He found her going through his files multiple times. She was always asking questions about his health, his medications, his life insurance policies. He told me he felt like she was circling him like a vulture waiting for him to die. Sarah's hands began to shake. Did he tell you he was going to leave her? Marcus nodded. He said he was going to file for divorce after the holidays. He didn't want to ruin Christmas, but come January, he was done. He'd already contacted a divorce attorney. He was going to make sure Diane got as little as possible in the settlement, and he specifically told me he was updating his will to put everything in an irrevocable trust for you. So Diane couldn't touch a penny even if he died before the divorce was finalized. The room seemed to tilt. Sarah gripped the edge of the table. He died before the divorce. He died before updating the will. Marcus's face was grim. Exactly. And now a convenient new will appears giving Diane everything. Sarah, I don't believe in coincidences. Something is very, very wrong here. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then I need proof. I need evidence that the will is fake. How do I do that? Marcus thought for a moment. You need a private investigator. Someone with experience in fraud cases. Someone who knows how to dig into backgrounds and finances. I know someone. His name is James Hartley. Former FBI agent, specialized in white-collar crime and fraud. He's expensive, but he's the best. If there's something to find, James will find it. Sarah nodded. Set it up. I don't care what it costs. Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call. Within an hour, Sarah had an appointment with James Hartley for that afternoon. James's office was in a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city. The office itself was small, functional, filled with filing cabinets and computer equipment. James was in his mid-50s, with graying hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of calm, observant demeanor that came from years of investigating criminals. Sarah sat across from his desk and told him everything for the second time that day. The will, her suspicions, Marcus's information about her father's plans. James listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When Sarah finished, she slid a copy of the will across his desk. Can you help me? James picked up the document and examined it carefully, his trained eyes scanning every detail. After several minutes, he looked up. On the surface, this looks legitimate. The signatures appear authentic, the witnesses seem credible, and the notary stamp is properly applied. But you're right to be suspicious. The timing is too convenient. Your father dies suddenly, and a will appears that dramatically benefits his wife just months before he supposedly planned to divorce her. That's a red flag. He set the document down. Here's what I can do. I'll investigate Diane's background thoroughly. I'll look into her finances, her past, her connections. I'll verify the notary stamp and track down the witnesses. I'll examine your father's medical records around the time of his death. And if there's fraud here, I'll find it. But I need you to understand something, Sarah. This could take weeks or even months. It will be expensive. And there's a chance, however small, that the will is legitimate and your father really did change his mind. Sarah met his eyes. He didn't change his mind. I know my father, and I don't care how long it takes or what it costs. I want the truth. James nodded. Then we have an agreement. I'll start immediately. They discussed his fees, his timeline, and his methods. Sarah signed a contract and wrote him a retainer check that made her bank account cry. But she didn't hesitate. This was her father's legacy. This was her inheritance. This was her entire future. It was worth every penny. James started working that same day. His first step was to investigate Diane's background before she married Robert Mitchell. What he found in the first 48 hours made Sarah's blood run cold. Diane's full name was Diane Marie Rousseau, before she became Diane Thompson and then Diane Mitchell. She'd been married twice before Robert. Both husbands had been wealthy older men. Both had died within 5 years of marriage. And both had changed their wills shortly before death, leaving the majority of their estates to Diane. James spread the files across his desk when Sarah came in for the update. Husband number 1 was Frank Thompson, a real estate developer in Florida. Married Diane when she was 25 and he was 53. 4 years later, Frank died of a heart attack. His will, which had been changed 6 months before his death, left Diane $5 million and his Miami Beach mansion. His 2 adult children from his first marriage contested the will, but lost. Sarah stared at the photo of Frank Thompson. He looked a little like her father, distinguished, successful, kind-faced, and husband number 2? James pulled out another file. Gerald Kensington, a retired investment banker in Connecticut. Married Diane 3 years after Frank's death. Gerald was 60 when they married. Diane was 32. 2.5 years into the marriage, Gerald fell down the stairs in their home, died of head trauma. His will, changed 8 months before his death, left everything to Diane, approximately $12 million. His sister tried to contest, claiming Diane had pushed him, but there was no evidence. Death was ruled accidental. Sarah felt sick. She's done this before, multiple times. She marries rich men, waits a few years, changes their wills, and then they conveniently die. James nodded grimly. That's the pattern. And now your father, husband number 3, dies of a sudden heart attack at 68, and a new will appears leaving her $50 million plus controlling interest in a billion-dollar company. If I were still at the FBI, this would be enough to open an investigation. But having a pattern and proving murder are 2 very different things. Sarah leaned forward. What about the will itself? Can we prove it's forged? James pulled out another document. That's where things get interesting. The notary stamp on your father's will belongs to a Robert Chen, a licensed notary in Charleston. I tracked down Robert's information. He moved to California 3 years ago. The address listed on your father's will for the notary's office. It's been empty for 2 years. The notarization is fake. Sarah, that stamp was either stolen or forged. Sarah felt a rush of hope for the first time in days. So the will is fraudulent. We can prove it. James held up a hand. We can prove the notarization is fraudulent. That's a good start. But we need to connect Diane directly to the forgery. She could claim she had no idea the notary was fake, that she trusted whoever arranged the will. We need more. We need to find who forged the document and tie them to Diane. Sarah thought for a moment. My father kept everything, every document, every note, every receipt. He was obsessive about records. He had a personal safe in his study at the house. If there's any evidence about his real intentions or about Diane, it would be in that safe. James's eyes sharpened. Can you access it? Sarah hesitated. Diane lives in the house now. She owns it according to the fake will. I can't just walk in. James leaned back in his chair. But you grew up there. You probably know the security codes, the layout, the safe combination. You could get in when she's not home. Sarah knew what he was suggesting. That's breaking and entering, James shrugged. Technically, yes, but it's your father's house, and we're looking for evidence of a crime. If we find proof that Diane forged the will, or worse, I can take it to the authorities and everything changes. The question is, are you willing to take that risk? Sarah thought about her father, about his dreams for her, about the company he'd built, about Diane walking around free and rich after potentially murdering 3 men. I'll do it, Sarah said. Tell me what I need to look for, and I'll get into that safe. 2 days later, Sarah sat in her car down the street from her childhood home, watching and waiting. It was Thursday evening, and Diane had a standing appointment at an exclusive spa downtown every Thursday at 7 o'clock. Sarah had confirmed this through careful observation over the past week. Like clockwork, Diane's black Mercedes pulled out of the driveway at 6:45. Sarah waited 10 more minutes to be sure, then drove up to the house. The house looked different now, even from the outside. Diane had already made changes: new landscaping, new outdoor furniture, a pretentious fountain in the front yard that her father would have hated. Sarah felt a surge of anger seeing how quickly Diane was erasing her father's presence from his own home. She parked in the back, near the kitchen entrance, where her car wouldn't be visible from the street. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled out the key she'd kept. The key Diane didn't know existed. It was an old key from when Sarah was a teenager, but the locks hadn't been changed. Sarah slipped it into the back door lock and turned. The door opened. She was in. The alarm system beeped, asking for the code. Sarah punched in her birthday, the code her father had used for everything. The beeping stopped. Silence. Sarah stood in the kitchen, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was the kitchen where her mother had made breakfast every Sunday morning, where her father had taught her to make his famous chocolate chip cookies, where they'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday nights. And now it felt foreign, cold. Diane had redecorated. Everything was white and chrome and sterile, all warmth removed. Sarah moved quickly through the house toward her father's study. She passed the living room, where family photos used to hang. They were gone now, replaced by expensive abstract art. She passed her old bedroom. The door was closed, and Sarah didn't want to know what Diane had done to it. Finally, she reached the study at the end of the hall. The door was unlocked. Sarah stepped inside and closed the door behind her, locking it. The study was the only room that still felt like her father. The mahogany desk he'd had since starting his company, the leather chair worn smooth from years of use, the bookshelves filled with business journals and biographies of entrepreneurs he admired, and on the wall, still hanging there, was the painting Sarah had given him for his 50th birthday. It was a portrait of the two of them from when Sarah was 7 years old, painted from a photograph taken at the beach. Her father was carrying her on his shoulders, both of them laughing. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. She touched the painting gently. "I'm going to fix this, Dad. I promise." Behind the painting was the safe, just as Sarah remembered. Her father had shown it to her years ago, told her the combination, made her promise to remember it in case of emergency. Sarah removed the painting carefully and set it on the desk. The safe was a standard wall model, nothing fancy. She entered the combination slowly, her fingers trembling. 61598. Her birthday, June 15th, 1998. The safe clicked. The door swung open. Inside were files, documents, leather-bound journals, and a small wooden box Sarah recognized as the one her father kept her mother's jewelry in. Sarah pulled everything out as quickly and carefully as she could, spreading it on the desk. There were legal documents, property deeds, stock certificates, and 3 leather journals dated from the past 3 years. Sarah grabbed the most recent journal and opened it to a random page. Her father's familiar handwriting filled the pages. She started reading, and her blood turned to ice. The entry was dated 4 months before her father's death. "Diane is becoming more aggressive in her interest about my health and finances. Today I found her in my study again, going through the filing cabinet. When I confronted her, she claimed she was looking for tax documents to give to our accountant, but our accountant already has all necessary documents. I don't trust her anymore. I think marrying her was the biggest mistake of my life, second only to not seeing what she really was sooner. I need to protect Sarah. I need to make sure Diane gets nothing if something happens to me." Sarah flipped forward, her hands shaking. Another entry from 3 months ago. "I met with a divorce attorney today, Christopher Walsh. He's preparing papers. I'm going to file in January after the holidays. I don't want to ruin Christmas for Sarah. Christopher advised me to immediately update my will and put everything in an irrevocable trust for Sarah. He's drafting the documents now. I should have done this years ago. I've been such a fool. Another entry, 2 months before his death. Diane has been very interested in my medications lately. She asked the doctor at my last appointment what I was taking for my heart condition, what the dosages were, what would happen if I took too much. The doctor thought she was just being a concerned wife, but I know better. I saw something in her eyes when she asked those questions. Something cold, something calculating. I'm scared, and I hate admitting that. I'm scared of my own wife. The final entry was dated 1 week before Robert Mitchell died. I'm meeting with Christopher tomorrow to sign the new will. Everything goes into a trust for Sarah. Diane gets nothing. I've also hired a private security company to install cameras in the house without Diane's knowledge. I need to know what she's doing when I'm not here. I feel paranoid writing this, like I'm losing my mind. But better paranoid than dead. Sarah clutched the journal to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Her father had known. He'd known Diane was dangerous. He'd been trying to protect himself and protect Sarah. But he'd run out of time. Sarah looked at the date of that final entry again. He'd written it 1 week before his death, which meant he was supposed to meet with the attorney the next day to sign the new will. Had he made it to that appointment? She needed to find out. Sarah grabbed her phone and took photos of every page in all 3 journals. Then she photographed all the documents in the safe, property deeds, insurance policies, everything. As she was photographing the last document, she heard something that made her freeze. The sound of a car door closing outside, then footsteps on the gravel driveway. Sarah looked at her watch. It was only 8:15. Diane wasn't supposed to be home until at least 9:30. Sarah's heart began to race. She quickly shoved all the documents back into the safe, closed it, and rehung the painting. She grabbed her phone and the most recent journal, unable to leave it behind. Then she heard the worst sound imaginable. A key turning in the front door lock. Diane was home. Sarah was trapped. The study was at the end of a long hallway with no other exit except the window. Sarah ran to the window and tried to open it. Stuck. It had been painted shut at some point. She pushed harder, using all her strength. The window gave way with a loud crack. Sarah heard Diane's voice from the front of the house. "Hello? Is someone here?" Her footsteps were coming down the hall, heels clicking on the hardwood floor, getting closer. Sarah climbed out onto the window ledge. It was a 15-foot drop to the ground, but there was a large oak tree nearby, the same tree Sarah had climbed 1,000 times as a kid. She reached for the nearest branch, got a grip, and pulled herself toward it. Behind her, she heard the study door handle rattle. Diane trying to get in. Sarah swung from the branch and dropped to the ground, landing hard on the grass. Pain shot through her ankle, but she didn't stop. She grabbed the journal, shoved it under her jacket, and ran toward her car in the darkness. Behind her, she heard the window opening wider and Diane's voice shouting, "Who's there? I'm calling the police." Sarah reached her car, jumped in, started the engine, and drove away without turning on her headlights until she was 2 blocks away. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. Her phone rang. It was James. "Sarah, where are you? Are you okay? I've been trying to reach you for 20 minutes. Sarah's voice shook as she answered, "I got into the safe. I got the journals. James, my father documented everything. He knew Diane was dangerous. He was going to divorce her. He was changing his will. But she must have found out. And I think," her voice broke, "I think she killed him before he could do any of it." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then James said quietly, "Come to my office right now. Bring everything you found. We need to talk to the police tonight. This is bigger than fraud, Sarah. This is murder." Sarah arrived at James's office 30 minutes later, still shaking from adrenaline. James was waiting with hot coffee and a serious expression. Sarah handed him the journal and her phone with all the photos she'd taken. James read through the journal entries slowly, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he set the journal down carefully and looked at Sarah. "This changes everything. Your father documented his fears about Diane. He documented her suspicious behavior regarding his medications, and he specifically stated he was updating his will to exclude her." Sarah wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, trying to stop their trembling. "What do we do now?" James pulled out his laptop. "First, we verify whether your father made it to that attorney appointment. You said the lawyer's name was Christopher Walsh." Sarah nodded. "That's what my father wrote. I don't know him, but we can look him up." James searched online and found Christopher Walsh, an attorney specializing in estate planning and divorce law with an office downtown. James picked up his phone and called, even though it was nearly 9 o'clock at night. To Sarah's surprise, someone answered. "Walsh and Associates, this is Christopher Walsh." James put the phone on speaker. "Mr. Walsh, my name is James Hartley. I'm a private investigator working on behalf of Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Robert Mitchell. I apologize for calling so late, but this is urgent. Did Robert Mitchell have an appointment with you approximately 3 months ago to update his will?" There was a pause. Then Christopher's voice, cautious now. "I can't discuss client matters without proper authorization." James looked at Sarah. She leaned toward the phone. "Mr. Walsh, this is Sarah Mitchell. My father died 3 months ago. A will has surfaced that I believe is fraudulent. I need to know if my father met with you to create a different will. Please, this is a matter of life and death." Another long pause. Then Christopher sighed. "Yes, Robert Mitchell was my client. He contacted me about divorce proceedings and estate planning. We had an appointment scheduled for 3 months ago, the day after he called me to set it up, but he never showed up. I tried calling him multiple times that day and the next. His phone went straight to voicemail. A week later, I saw his obituary in the newspaper. I'm very sorry for your loss, Miss Mitchell." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "So he never signed a new will with you?" Christopher replied. "No. We'd discussed the terms over the phone. He wanted everything placed in an irrevocable trust for you, with specific provisions ensuring his wife Diane would receive only what she was legally entitled to under state law, which would be minimal given his prenuptial agreement. But we never got to execute the documents because he died before our appointment." James leaned forward. "Mr. Walsh, can you confirm the date of that scheduled appointment?" Christopher responded. "It was September 15th at 2 p.m. He died that night." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Her father died the same day he was supposed to sign a will that would cut Diane out of his fortune. That couldn't be a coincidence. James thanked Christopher and ended the call. Then he looked at Sarah. "I think we have enough to go to the police. Between the journals, the fake notary, Diane's history of marrying and outliving wealthy men, and the timing of your father's death, there's reasonable suspicion of foul play." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. "But will they investigate? My father's death was ruled a heart attack. The will looks official on the surface. What if they think I'm just a bitter daughter who doesn't want to share her inheritance?" James pulled out another file. "That's why I've been digging into Diane's finances. I found something very interesting in her bank records from 2 months before your father's death. She made a $50,000 cash withdrawal. There's no record of what she spent it on. No major purchases, no investments, nothing. $50,000 just disappeared." Sarah frowned. "What does that mean?" James pulled out printouts of bank statements with highlighted sections. "People pay for illegal services in cash, so there's no trail. Forged documents don't come cheap, especially ones that can pass initial scrutiny. I think Diane paid someone to forge that will. If we can find who she paid, we can prove the whole thing is fake." Sarah felt a surge of hope. "How do we find them?" James smiled grimly. "We set a trap. Diane doesn't know we're investigating her. She thinks she got away with everything. People who get away with crimes often get sloppy, especially when they feel safe. I'm going to put out feelers in certain communities, people who specialize in document forgery. I'll let it be known that someone is asking questions about a forged will in Charleston involving a wealthy estate. If the person who forged your father's will hears that investigators are sniffing around, they might panic. And when people panic, they make mistakes. Over the next 2 weeks, James worked his network of contacts in the criminal underworld. He talked to informants, forgers, and people who operated in the gray areas of the law. He spread the word carefully, making it seem like a federal investigation was heating up around a major document forgery case. He mentioned the Mitchell name just enough to make it recognizable, but not enough to seem like he was the one asking. Then, late one night, James got a call from one of his informants, a man named Tony who worked as a middleman for various illegal services. "You're looking into a forged will for the Mitchell family?" Tony asked. James confirmed he was. Tony continued, "I might know something. There's a guy named Victor Torres who does high-end document forgery. Wills, contracts, certificates, you name it. Word is he did a job a few months ago for a wealthy woman, something involving an inheritance. Big payday, $50,000. But now Victor is nervous because he's hearing rumors about investigations." James felt his pulse quicken. "Where can I find Victor Torres?" Tony gave him an address, a cheap motel on the outskirts of Charleston. James called Sarah immediately. "I found him. The forger. I'm going to confront him tomorrow. If I can get him to confess on camera and identify Diane as the person who hired him, we can take everything to the police and blow this case wide open." The next morning, James drove to the motel with a hidden camera in his jacket pocket. The place was run down, with peeling paint and a parking lot full of cars that had seen better days. James found room 114 and knocked. A man in his 40s answered, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, nervous. "Victor Torres?" James asked. The man tried to close the door, but James put his foot in the way. "I'm not a cop, Victor. I'm a private investigator. I need to talk to you about a will you forged 3 months ago for a woman named Diane Mitchell." Victor's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about. Get out of here." James didn't move. "Victor, you're in deep trouble. The FBI is looking into this case. They know about the $50,000. They know about the forged notary stamp. Right now, you're looking at federal fraud charges, conspiracy, maybe even accessory to murder if they can prove Diane killed her husband. That's 20 years minimum in federal prison. But if you cooperate, if you testify against Diane, you might get immunity or a reduced sentence." Victor stared at him, sweat beading on his forehead. "Murder? I didn't know anything about murder. She just said she needed a will updated, that her husband was sick and couldn't get to a notary, that it was urgent." James pulled out his phone and showed Victor a photo of Robert Mitchell. This man died the same day he was supposed to sign a real will that would have cut Diane out of his fortune. Instead, your forged will gave her everything, and now you're part of it, Victor, unless you help me. Victor's hand shook. He looked down the motel hallway, then back at James. "Come inside, fast." They went into the room. It was messy. Clothes everywhere. Fast food wrappers on every surface. Victor sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "She contacted me through an intermediary, someone I'd worked with before. Said there was a wealthy woman who needed a sensitive document handled. I met Diane at a coffee shop. She seemed normal, just a rich lady who wanted to change her husband's will without him knowing. She said he had dementia, that he'd forgotten he wanted to update his will, that she was doing him a favor." James sat down across from him. "Did you believe her?" Victor laughed bitterly. "I didn't care. She was paying $50,000 for one forged will. That's more than I usually make in a year. She gave me Robert Mitchell's real signature from other documents so I could practice copying it. She gave me the exact wording she wanted in the will. She even provided the names of 2 people who would act as witnesses. Said they were friends who owed her favors. and she gave me a stolen notary stamp she'd acquired somehow. All I had to do was put it together and make it look legitimate. James made sure his hidden camera was recording everything. And you didn't question why a wife would forge her husband's will? Victor stood up, pacing. Look, I forge documents for a living. I don't ask questions. That's the rule. But yeah, it seemed weird. And when I saw the guy died a week after I finished the will, I got nervous. Real nervous. I've been waiting for the cops to show up ever since. James leaned forward. Victor, I need you to testify. I need you to identify Diane Mitchell as the person who hired you. I need you to explain exactly what you did and how she instructed you to do it. If you do that, I'll work with the district attorney to get you a deal. You'll probably do some time, but it'll be minimal compared to what you're facing if you don't cooperate. Victor was silent for a long moment, thinking. Finally, he nodded. Okay, I'll testify. But I want immunity in writing before I say anything official. James stood up and extended his hand. Deal. I'm taking this to the police today. Expect to hear from the district attorney's office within 48 hours. Victor shook his hand weakly. James left the motel and immediately called Sarah. We got him. Victor Torres confessed on camera. He identified Diane as the person who hired him to forge the will. We have everything we need. That afternoon, James and Sarah walked into the Charleston Police Department and asked to speak with someone in the fraud division. They were directed to Detective Linda Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s with 25 years of experience. Detective Morrison listened as Sarah and James laid out everything. The journals, the fake notary, Diane's history of marrying wealthy men who died young. The attorney appointment Robert never made it to, Victor Torres's confession video, the $50,000 cash withdrawal, all of it. Detective Morrison reviewed every piece of evidence methodically. When she finished, she looked up at Sarah and James with a grim expression. This is enough for a warrant. We're going to bring Diane Mitchell in for questioning regarding fraud and forgery. The murder angle is trickier. We'll need to exhume your father's body and do a new autopsy, specifically looking for signs of poisoning or medication overdose. That takes time and a court order. But the fraud case? That we can move on immediately. The next morning, 2 police officers arrived at Sarah's childhood home with a warrant for Diane's arrest. Sarah and James watched from a car down the street as Diane answered the door in a silk robe, coffee cup in hand, her perfect blonde hair arranged just so. The officers showed her the warrant. Diane's confident expression faltered. This is ridiculous. I haven't done anything wrong. You can't just arrest me. One officer replied calmly. Ma'am, you're being charged with fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. They put handcuffs on Diane right there in the doorway of the house she'd stolen. Sarah watched with grim satisfaction as they led her to the police car. Diane's face had gone from confident to panicked in seconds. For the first time since the funeral, Sarah saw real emotion on Diane's face. Fear. At the police station, Diane was placed in an interrogation room. Her lawyer, a slick defense attorney named Martin Cross, was already there waiting. Detective Morrison entered with a thick file and a laptop. She sat down across from Diane and her lawyer and stated the time and date for the recording. Mrs. Mitchell, do you know why you're here? Detective Morrison asked. Diane lifted her chin, trying to regain her composure. I assume this is about my late husband's will. And I assume his daughter has been spreading lies about me because she's bitter about her inheritance. Detective Morrison opened the file. Let's talk about that will. Specifically, let's talk about the notary stamp on the document. The stamp belongs to Robert Chen, a notary whose office has been closed for 2 years and who moved to California 3 years ago. How do you explain that? Diane glanced at her lawyer. Martin jumped in. My client relied on professionals to handle the will. If there was an error with the notary, that's not her fault. Detective Morrison smiled coldly. Interesting. Let's talk about Victor Torres then. She turned the laptop around, showing the video of Victor's confession. Diane's face went pale as she watched Victor explain in detail how Diane had hired him to forge the will, had paid him $50,000 in cash, and had provided him with everything he needed to make it look legitimate. When the video ended, the room was silent. Diane's lawyer looked shocked. "My client has no comment at this time." Detective Morrison leaned forward. "Mrs. Mitchell, we have documentation of your $50,000 cash withdrawal 2 months before your husband's death. We have Victor Torres's testimony. We have your late husband's journals documenting his suspicions about you and his plans to divorce you and change his will. We have proof that the notary stamp was fraudulent. The will is fake, and you orchestrated the entire forgery. Do you want to explain your side of this, or do you want to wait for the prosecutor to add more charges?" Diane stared at the table, her perfect composure completely shattered. Her hands trembled. For several minutes, she said nothing. Then, quietly, she whispered, "I want to make a deal." Her lawyer grabbed her arm. "Diane, don't say anything. We need to talk privately first." But Diane shook him off. She looked at Detective Morrison with cold calculation returning to her eyes. "I'll tell you everything about the will, but I want immunity from murder charges." The room went very still. Detective Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Why would you need immunity from murder charges, Mrs. Mitchell? Your husband died of a heart attack." Diane's smile was bitter. "Did he? Are you sure about that? Because I'm not saying another word until I have immunity in writing." Her lawyer looked horrified. "Diane, stop talking right now." But Diane ignored him, her eyes locked on Detective Morrison. "I spent 5 years with that boring, self-righteous man. 5 years of pretending to care about his stories, his company, his precious daughter. I earned that money, every penny. And yes, I forged the will. But that's all I'm admitting to without immunity." Detective Morrison stood up. "Interview suspended. Mrs. Mitchell, you're being held on charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Your bail hearing will be tomorrow." Diane was taken to a holding cell, and Detective Morrison immediately called the district attorney's office. Within hours, they had a court order to exhume Robert Mitchell's body for a new autopsy. The medical examiner was instructed to specifically look for signs of poisoning, medication overdose, or any other cause of death that might have been missed in the original autopsy. 3 days later, the results came back. The medical examiner found lethal levels of blood pressure medication in Robert Mitchell's system, far exceeding his prescribed dosage. The amount found would have caused a massive heart attack in anyone, let alone someone with an existing heart condition. The original autopsy had noted the heart attack, but hadn't done a comprehensive toxicology screen because there was no reason to suspect foul play at the time. Now there was every reason. Detective Morrison compared Robert's prescription records with the toxicology report. Robert had been prescribed a moderate dose of blood pressure medication, but the levels in his system indicated he'd taken nearly 10 times that amount in the hours before his death. Either he'd accidentally overdosed, which seemed unlikely for a meticulous man like Robert, or someone had given him the medication without his knowledge. Detective Morrison pulled Diane's prescription records. Diane had been filling prescriptions for the same blood pressure medication for over a year, claiming she needed it for hypertension. But Diane's medical records showed she had perfectly normal blood pressure. She'd never needed the medication. Armed with this new evidence, the district attorney filed additional charges against Diane Mitchell, first-degree murder. The bail that had been set at $500,000 for the fraud charges was revoked entirely. Diane would remain in jail until trial. The trial began 6 weeks later and lasted for 8 weeks. The prosecution presented a devastating case. They showed the forged will and Victor Torres's testimony about how Diane had hired him. They presented Robert's journals, where he documented his fears about Diane and her suspicious interest in his medications. They brought in the medical examiner, who explained how the lethal dose of blood pressure medication had caused Robert's heart attack. They showed Diane's prescription records for medication she didn't need. They presented evidence of her previous marriages to wealthy men who had died young and changed their wills shortly before death. The defense tried to create reasonable doubt. They argued that Victor Torres was a criminal who couldn't be trusted. They claimed the journals were just the paranoid writings of a sick man. They suggested Robert might have accidentally taken too much medication. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury saw through every argument. After 4 hours of deliberation, they returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Diane Mitchell to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led her away, Diane looked back at Sarah one final time. Her face was full of hatred and bitterness. "You think you won?" she hissed. "You think you're better than me? You were born with everything. I had to fight for every scrap. You'll never understand what that's like." Sarah looked at her with something closer to pity than anger. "You're right. I was born with everything. A father who loved me, a mother who cherished me, a family that taught me right from wrong. You could have had a good life, Diane. But you chose greed over everything else, and now you'll spend the rest of your life in prison because of it." Diane was taken away, and Sarah never saw her again. The forged will was officially nullified by the court. All of Robert Mitchell's assets were returned to his estate, and Sarah, as his only legal heir, inherited everything. Mitchell Technologies, the family home, the vacation properties, the investments, and the $50 million Diane had tried to steal. Everything her father had built was finally, legally, rightfully hers. The day after Diane's sentencing, Sarah stood in her father's study for the first time as the legal owner of everything in it. The house was hers now. The company was hers. The future her father had always envisioned for her was finally within reach, but the victory felt bittersweet. She ran her fingers along the edge of his mahogany desk, imagining him sitting there, working late into the night on deals and strategies and dreams for Mitchell Technologies. Richard Morrison, her father's attorney, came by that afternoon to finalize all the estate paperwork. He brought boxes of documents that needed Sarah's signature, transferring everything officially into her name. As they worked through the paperwork, Richard looked at Sarah with something like awe. "Your father would be incredibly proud of you, Sarah. What you did, how you fought for the truth, the way you refused to give up even when everything seemed lost. That took remarkable courage." Sarah set down her pen and looked at him. "I just wish I'd seen it sooner. Maybe I could have saved him. Maybe if I'd paid more attention, if I'd visited more often, if I'd noticed something was wrong with Diane earlier." Richard shook his head firmly. "Don't do that to yourself. Diane was a professional. She'd done this before, multiple times, and gotten away with it every time. She was careful, calculated, patient. Even your father, who was one of the smartest, most observant men I've ever known, didn't realize what she was until it was almost too late. You can't blame yourself for not seeing what she worked so hard to hide." Sarah nodded, knowing he was right but still feeling the weight of guilt. "What happens to Diane's previous victims, the other men she married and possibly killed?" Richard pulled out a file. "I've been in contact with the families of Frank Thompson and Gerald Kensington, her first 2 husbands. Both families are reopening investigations into those deaths. With Diane's conviction in your father's case, they now have grounds to request exhumations and new autopsies. If those cases show similar patterns of medication poisoning, Diane could face additional murder charges. She'll never see freedom again, Sarah. Justice is being served, not just for your father, but potentially for all her victims." That gave Sarah some comfort, but it didn't bring her father back. Nothing would. She finished signing the documents, and Richard stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. "Your father left you something else, Sarah." something I was instructed to give you only after his estate was fully settled and you'd officially inherited everything. He handed her a sealed envelope with her name written in her father's handwriting. He gave this to me 2 years ago, with very specific instructions. I was to keep it safe and give it to you when the time was right. I think that time is now. Sarah took the envelope with shaking hands. After Richard left, she sat in her father's leather chair and carefully opened it. Inside was a letter, 3 pages long, written in her father's neat, precise handwriting. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she began to read. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope I lived a long, full life and died peacefully in my sleep as an old man. But I'm writing this because I want you to know certain things, regardless of how or when I die. First, and most importantly, you are the greatest achievement of my life. Not Mitchell Technologies, not the fortune I built, not any of the success or recognition I received. You. Raising you. Watching you grow into the remarkable woman you've become. That has been my life's greatest joy and privilege. Your mother and I used to talk about what kind of person you'd become. We dreamed about your future, your accomplishments, your happiness. When she died, I was devastated. I didn't know how to go on. But then I would look at you, and I would see her smile in your smile, her kindness in your heart, her strength in your determination. You saved me, Sarah. You gave me a reason to keep going. You were my anchor when the world felt like it was falling apart. I made mistakes after your mother died. I was lonely, and I let that loneliness make me vulnerable to people who didn't have my best interests at heart. If I married someone who turned out to be unworthy of our family, please know that my love for you never wavered, not for a single moment. You are my daughter, my heir, my legacy. Everything I built was always meant for you. By the time you read this, you will have inherited Mitchell Technologies and everything that comes with it. That's a heavy responsibility, sweetheart, but I know you're more than capable of handling it. You have your mother's heart and my head for business. You'll do things with the company I never imagined. You'll take it to heights I never could have reached, and you'll do it with integrity, compassion, and vision. But Sarah, don't let the company consume your life the way it sometimes consumed mine. Don't sacrifice your happiness for success. Find someone who loves you for who you are, not for what you have. Build a family. Fill your life with joy and laughter and love. Make time for the things that matter. Your mother taught me that lesson, and I forgot it for too long after she died. Don't make the same mistake. I've set up the Mitchell Foundation in your name. It's funded with $20 million to start, and I've instructed the board to work with you on establishing its mission and focus. Use it to make the world better in whatever way calls to your heart. Your mother always said the purpose of wealth is to lift others up. I believe that. I hope you do too. Finally, know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the woman you've become. I'm proud of your kindness, your intelligence, your strength, your compassion. I'm proud to be your father. And wherever I am now, I'm watching over you, cheering you on, believing in you with every fiber of my being. Live well, my darling girl. Live fully, live joyfully, live with purpose. Make your mark on the world, and know that you were loved, so deeply loved, by both your mother and me. You always will be. All my love, always and forever, Dad. Sarah sat in that leather chair and cried for an hour, clutching the letter to her chest. When the tears finally stopped, she felt something shift inside her. The grief was still there, would always be there, but alongside it now was determination. Her father had believed in her. He'd built an empire and entrusted it to her care. He'd given her the resources to make a difference in the world, and she wasn't going to let him down. The next morning, Sarah walked into Mitchell Technologies headquarters as the new CEO. The board of directors had unanimously voted to appoint her after Diane's arrest, and now Sarah stood in the executive suite that had been her father's for 40 years. The staff lined up to meet her, offering congratulations and condolences in equal measure. Marcus Chen was there, her father's old friend and now her chief advisor. He hugged her tightly. "Welcome home, Sarah. Your father's legacy is in good hands." Sarah's first order of business as CEO was to address the company. She called an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium, something her father had done once a year. 1,500 employees gathered, curious and apprehensive about the leadership change. Sarah stood at the podium, looking out at all those faces, and felt her father's presence beside her. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "Thank you all for being here. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and as of today, I'm honored to serve as CEO of the company my father spent his life building. I know many of you are wondering what changes I'll make, what direction I'll take the company, whether I'm capable of filling my father's shoes. The truth is, I can never fill his shoes. Robert Mitchell was one of a kind, a visionary who built something extraordinary from nothing. But I don't need to fill his shoes. I need to walk my own path while honoring his legacy. My father believed that a company's greatest asset isn't its technology or its profits or its market share. It's its people. Every person in this room is part of the Mitchell Technologies family, and under my leadership, that's not going to change. In fact, I'm going to make sure we live up to that ideal even more. Today, I'm announcing several initiatives. First, we're increasing our investment in employee development and education. If you want to learn a new skill, pursue additional training, or even go back to school, Mitchell Technologies will support you financially and with flexible scheduling. Second, we're implementing a profit-sharing program. When the company does well, everyone shares in that success, not just the executives and shareholders. You work hard for this company, and you deserve to benefit directly from that work. Third, we're establishing a comprehensive family leave policy, one of the most generous in the tech industry. Parents need time with their children. That's not a luxury, that's a necessity, and Mitchell Technologies is going to lead by example. Finally, I'm launching the Mitchell Foundation, dedicated to supporting causes that align with our values: education, innovation, and community development. Every employee will have the opportunity to nominate causes or organizations for foundation support. This is your company as much as it is mine, and your voices matter. My father built Mitchell Technologies on the principle that technology should make people's lives better. Not just our customers' lives, but our employees' lives, our communities' lives, the world's lives. That's the vision I'm committed to, and I hope you'll join me in pursuing it. The auditorium erupted in applause. Sarah saw tears in some eyes, smiles on many faces, and she knew in that moment that she'd struck the right tone. These people had loved her father, and they were willing to give her a chance to prove she was worthy of his legacy. After the meeting, dozens of employees came up to Sarah personally to thank her, to share memories of her father, to express their excitement about the company's future. It was exhausting and overwhelming and absolutely perfect. Over the following months, Sarah threw herself into running Mitchell Technologies. She worked 16-hour days, learning every aspect of the business, meeting with department heads, reviewing products and strategies, making decisions that would shape the company's future. She promoted from within, elevating talented people who'd been overlooked under the previous leadership. She invested heavily in research and development, pushing the company into new markets and technologies. And she kept her promises about employee benefits, profit sharing, and family leave. The results were immediate and impressive. Employee satisfaction scores went through the roof. Productivity increased. Innovation flourished. And within the first year of Sarah's leadership, Mitchell Technologies' revenue grew by 28%. The highest growth rate in the company's history. Business magazines wrote profiles about Sarah, calling her the next great tech CEO, comparing her favorably to industry legends. But Sarah didn't let the praise go to her head. She remembered her father's letter, his warning not to let success consume her life. Sarah also made good on her father's wish regarding the Mitchell Foundation. She worked with the board to establish the foundation's mission, supporting education and opportunity for underprivileged youth. funding programs that helped at-risk kids pursue careers in technology and business. The foundation provided scholarships, mentorship programs, internships, and job training. In its first year, the Mitchell Foundation helped over 5,000 young people, and Sarah planned to expand that number every year. But there was one more thing Sarah needed to do to truly honor her father's memory and to help others avoid what her family had gone through. She became an advocate for elder abuse prevention and inheritance fraud protection. She testified before state legislatures, pushing for stronger laws requiring multiple witnesses for will changes, mandatory waiting periods, and better verification processes for notarization. She funded legal aid programs to help families fight fraudulent wills and estate theft. She made it her mission to ensure that no one else would lose their inheritance to a predator like Diane. 2 years after her father's death, Sarah sat in a television studio preparing for an interview on a major news program. They wanted to talk about her success at Mitchell Technologies, about the foundation's work, and about her advocacy for stronger inheritance protection laws. But they also wanted to talk about Diane, about the trial, about how Sarah had fought for justice. Sarah had initially been reluctant to do the interview, not wanting to relive the pain publicly. But her publicist convinced her that telling her story could help others who might be in similar situations. The interviewer, a well-known journalist named Catherine Reed, sat across from Sarah with a warm but professional demeanor. When the cameras started rolling, Catherine began gently. "Sarah Mitchell, thank you for being here today. Your story has captivated the nation, not just because of the dramatic trial and your stepmother's conviction, but because of what you've done since then. Let's start at the beginning. When your father died, what made you suspicious that something wasn't right?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. It was the will itself, or more specifically, it was knowing my father. He told me my entire life that everything he built was for me. We'd had conversations about my future role at Mitchell Technologies, about his vision for the company after he retired, and then suddenly, 3 days after his funeral, a will appears leaving 80% of everything to Diane, his wife of 13 years. It didn't fit. It didn't make sense. And when something doesn't make sense, you have to ask why. Catherine leaned forward. But questioning a legal document is one thing. Proving it's fraudulent is another. How did you even know where to start? Sarah smiled slightly. Not really. I hired a private investigator, James Hartley, who became invaluable in uncovering the truth. But the real breakthrough came from my father himself. He'd kept journals documenting his suspicions about Diane, his fears about her intentions, and his plans to protect me through a new will. Those journals gave us the roadmap for our investigation. Catherine's expression turned serious. Your father documented that he felt unsafe around Diane, that he suspected she was interested in his medications. Did you feel guilty when you read those entries, knowing he'd been scared and you hadn't known? Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. Every day, I carry that guilt with me constantly. I wish I'd visited more. I wish I'd paid closer attention. I wish I'd seen the signs. But guilt doesn't change the past. What it can do is motivate you to ensure it doesn't happen to others, which is why I've become so passionate about elder abuse prevention. Catherine nodded sympathetically. Let's talk about that. You've testified before 3 state legislatures now, pushing for stronger will verification laws. What specific changes are you advocating for? Sarah sat up straighter, her passion for this topic evident. Right now, in most states, changing a will is far too easy. You need witnesses, yes, but those witnesses don't have to be impartial. They can be friends of the person benefiting from the will. The notarization process often isn't verified thoroughly. What I'm pushing for is mandatory cooling-off periods for major will changes, especially when the change dramatically alters the distribution of assets. I want requirements that beneficiaries of new wills cannot serve as witnesses. And I want a national database for notary verifications, so fraudulent stamps can be caught immediately. Catherine looked impressed. Those are significant reforms. Have you faced opposition? Sarah laughed dryly. Absolutely. Some attorneys argue it would slow down legitimate estate planning. Some civil liberties groups worry about government overreach into private family matters. But I've seen firsthand what happens when there aren't enough safeguards. Predators target vulnerable elderly people, marry them, isolate them from their families, and then steal their life savings through fraudulent wills. It's happening every day across this country, and we need to do more to stop it. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering Sarah's work at Mitchell Technologies, the Foundation's initiatives, and her vision for the future. When it aired 2 weeks later, it sparked a national conversation about elder abuse and inheritance fraud. Sarah received hundreds of letters from people who'd experienced similar situations, people who'd lost inheritances to step-parents or caregivers or supposed friends who'd manipulated elderly relatives. Each letter broke Sarah's heart and strengthened her resolve. During this time, Sarah also reconnected with James Hartley, the private investigator who'd helped her uncover Diane's crimes. They'd stayed in touch professionally after the trial, but gradually their relationship evolved into friendship. James was divorced with no children, dedicated to his work, intelligent and principled. He understood what Sarah had been through because he'd been there beside her through the worst of it. 3 years after her father's death, James asked Sarah to dinner, not as investigator and client, but as two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully. Both had been burned before, Sarah by Diane's betrayal of her family, and James by a marriage that ended because he'd been too consumed by his work. They took their time, building trust and understanding. They talked for hours about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. James never pushed Sarah to move faster than she was comfortable with, and Sarah appreciated that patience more than she could express. One evening, about 6 months into their relationship, James and Sarah were having dinner at her childhood home, which Sarah had renovated extensively to remove all traces of Diane's influence. They were in the kitchen, Sarah cooking while James chopped vegetables, when he said casually, "I've been thinking about something." Sarah glanced at him. "Dangerous activity?" He smiled. "Funny." "No. I've been thinking about what you said in that interview, about carrying guilt for not seeing what was happening with your father, and I wanted to tell you something I've never told anyone." Sarah stopped cooking and turned to face him fully, sensing this was important. James set down the knife and looked at her with an intensity she rarely saw from him. "When I was at the FBI, I worked a case involving an elderly woman who was being scammed by her caregiver. The caregiver was stealing from her, forging checks, isolating her from her family. We had evidence. We knew what was happening. But the woman refused to testify against the caregiver. She said the caregiver was the only person who cared about her, even though we could prove that wasn't true. We couldn't prosecute without her cooperation, so the caregiver got away with it. 2 months later, the woman died, and the caregiver inherited everything." James paused, his expression pained. "I carried guilt about that case for years. I felt like I'd failed her. I should have done more, pushed harder, found another way to stop the caregiver. It ate at me. But eventually, I realized something. We can't save everyone, Sarah. We can't prevent every injustice, stop every criminal, or undo every wrong. What we can do is fight like hell for the people we can save and for the justice we can achieve. You saved yourself, Sarah. You uncovered the truth about Diane, brought her to justice, and protected countless others through your advocacy work. That's not failure, that's heroism." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "And I don't feel like a hero. I feel like a daughter who didn't protect her father." James crossed the kitchen and took her hands in his. "Your father didn't need protection from you. He needed protection from a sociopath who was expert at manipulation and deception. And when you discovered what happened, you didn't give up. You fought back. You honored his memory in the most meaningful way possible. That's what a hero does. Sarah, not preventing tragedy, but how you respond to it. That night, for the first time since her father's death, Sarah felt the weight of guilt lift just a little. She realized James was right. She couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future, and she was already doing that, through her work at the company, through the foundation, through her advocacy, and through building a life her father would be proud of. A year later, James proposed to Sarah in her father's study, the room where so much pain had begun, but where Sarah now felt closest to her father's memory. James got down on one knee and said simply, "Sarah Mitchell, you are the strongest, most compassionate, most brilliant woman I've ever known. I love you completely. Will you marry me?" Sarah said yes without hesitation, knowing her father would have approved wholeheartedly. They married 6 months later in a small, intimate ceremony in the garden of Sarah's childhood home. The wedding was attended by close friends and family only, Marcus Chen and his wife, Richard Morrison and his partner, several colleagues from Mitchell Technologies, and a handful of Sarah's friends from college. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Sarah wore her mother's wedding dress, which she'd kept preserved all these years. When the officiant asked who gave Sarah away, Marcus stepped forward and said, "Her father, in spirit, and all of us who love her." During her vows, Sarah spoke directly to James, but also to the memory of her father. "I spent a long time being angry after my father died. Angry at Diane for what she did. Angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. Angry at the universe for taking him too early. But I've learned that anger can transform into purpose. And my purpose now is to build a life filled with love, integrity, and meaning. James, you've shown me that happiness is possible even after devastating loss. You've supported my dreams, my work, my mission to make the world a little bit better. And you've loved me through my worst moments without judgment or reservation. I promise to love you with that same depth, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, and to build a life together that honors the best of what my parents taught me about love and family." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden, after the ceremony, as Sarah and James danced their first dance as husband and wife under strings of lights in the evening air. Sarah looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you, Dad," for everything. She felt, in that moment, that her father was there, watching over her, proud of the woman she'd become and the life she was building. 5 years after Diane's conviction, Sarah stood in the conference room of Mitchell Technologies, presenting the company's annual results to the board of directors. The numbers were extraordinary. Under Sarah's leadership, the company had doubled its revenue, expanded into new markets across 3 continents, and become one of the most admired companies in the tech industry. But more importantly to Sarah, they'd maintained their commitment to their employees and their values. Mitchell Technologies had been named one of the best places to work in America for 3 consecutive years. After the board meeting, Marcus pulled Sarah aside. He was 73 now and planning to retire at the end of the year. "Your father used to say that success isn't measured by profit margins or stock prices. It's measured by the lives you impact and the legacy you leave behind. Sarah, you've exceeded his wildest dreams. You've built on his foundation and created something even more remarkable. I hope you know that." Sarah hugged him tightly. "I couldn't have done any of it without you, Marcus. You've been my guide, my advisor, my link to Dad's vision. Thank you for everything." Marcus smiled, his eyes misty. "It's been my honor. Now, before I retire, there's one more thing I want to show you. Follow me." They walked through the headquarters building to a newly constructed wing that had been closed for renovations. Marcus opened the double doors with a flourish, revealing a beautiful space filled with natural light, modern furniture, and innovative technology. But what caught Sarah's attention immediately was the wall of photographs and plaques at the entrance. It was a memorial to Robert Mitchell, featuring photos from throughout his life. As a young entrepreneur starting his company with his wife and baby Sarah, at company milestones, and in his later years as a successful CEO. The board approved this last month, Marcus explained. We're calling it the Robert Mitchell Innovation Center. It's dedicated to research and development of technologies that improve people's lives, particularly in education and healthcare. We've already hired a team of researchers and engineers who will work here, developing solutions for underserved communities. The first project is creating low-cost tablets and software for schools in developing countries, giving children access to quality education they wouldn't otherwise have. Sarah walked slowly along the memorial wall, reading the plaques that described her father's achievements, his philosophy, his impact. At the end of the wall was a quote her father had said often: "Technology without purpose is just noise. Our purpose is to make the world better, one innovation at a time." Below the quote was a photograph Sarah had never seen before. It showed her father in his study, sitting at his desk, with a framed photo of Sarah's college graduation visible beside him. He was smiling, and his eyes were full of pride and love. "When was this taken?" Sarah asked, her voice thick with emotion. Marcus came to stand beside her. "About 6 months before he died. I took it during one of our lunch meetings. He was telling me about your latest project at the company, how impressed he was with your work. He said, 'Marcus, watching Sarah grow into the leader she's becoming is the greatest gift I've ever received. I wanted you to have this photo, to remember that he saw your potential long before the rest of the world did.'" Sarah stood there for a long time, staring at her father's smile, remembering his voice, feeling his love reaching across time. When she finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. "I miss him every single day." Marcus put his arm around her shoulders. "I know. We all do. But he's not really gone, Sarah. He lives on in this company, in the foundation bearing his name, in every life that's been changed by your work. And most of all, he lives on in you. You are his legacy, and it's a legacy he'd be incredibly proud of." That evening, Sarah went home to the house she now shared with James. They'd moved out of her childhood home a year after getting married, finding it too full of complicated memories to build their future there. Instead, they'd sold it to a lovely family with 3 children, people who would fill it with laughter and joy the way it had been filled when Sarah's mother was alive. Sarah and James had bought a smaller, cozier home in a quiet neighborhood, a place that was entirely theirs. James was in the kitchen making dinner when Sarah arrived. She told him about the Innovation Center, about the memorial wall, about the photo of her father. James listened quietly, then pulled her into his arms. "Your father would be so proud of everything you've accomplished, not just the company's success, but the person you've become. The way you've turned your grief into purpose, your anger into advocacy, your loss into something that helps others. That's extraordinary, Sarah." Sarah rested her head on his chest. "I've been thinking about something." James smiled. "Should I be worried?" She laughed and pulled back to look at him. "No. I've been thinking about what Dad wrote in his letter, about not letting the company consume my life, about making time for family. I've been thinking it's time we start our own family. If you're ready?" James's face lit up with a joy so pure it took Sarah's breath away. "Are you serious?" "Sarah, I've been ready since the day we got married. I just didn't want to push you, because I know how demanding your work is and how much the company means to you." Sarah kissed him softly. "The company is important. The work is important. But you're right. Dad spent so much of his life building a business that he sometimes missed out on the small moments with me and Mom. I don't want to make that mistake. I want to build a life, not just a legacy." 9 months later, Sarah gave birth to a baby girl. She and James named her Elena Rose Mitchell Hartley, Elena for Sarah's mother, whose middle name had been Elena, and rose for the white roses Sarah's father had always brought her on her birthday. Baby Elena had Sarah's dark hair and James's gray eyes, and from the moment Sarah held her, she understood on a deeper level why her father had been so protective, why he'd worked so hard to build something lasting, why he'd fought so fiercely to ensure Sarah's future was secure. Sarah took 6 months of maternity leave, the generous family leave policy she'd implemented at Mitchell Technologies, applying to the CEO just as much as to any other employee. During those months, she focused entirely on her daughter, on learning to be a mother, on the miracle of watching this tiny human grow and change every day. James was a devoted father, taking his own paternity leave and sharing every responsibility from midnight feedings to diaper changes to endless walks, trying to soothe a colicky baby. When Sarah returned to work, she did so with a renewed perspective. She still worked hard, still led the company with vision and purpose, but she also left the office at reasonable hours. She attended Elena's daycare events. She took weekends off to be fully present with her family. She learned to delegate, to trust her executive team, to understand that being a good CEO didn't mean sacrificing everything else in her life. The Mitchell Foundation continued to grow under Sarah's guidance. By Elena's second birthday, the foundation had helped over 50,000 young people pursue education and careers in technology. They'd funded hundreds of programs, provided thousands of scholarships, and created opportunities for kids who might never have had a chance otherwise. Sarah often brought Elena to foundation events, wanting her daughter to grow up understanding the importance of using privilege and resources to help others. On what would have been Robert Mitchell's 75th birthday, Sarah organized a special event at Mitchell Technologies. She unveiled a scholarship program called the Robert Mitchell Memorial Scholarship, which would provide full college tuition, room, board, and a living stipend to 100 students every year. The students would be selected not based on grades or test scores, but based on their determination, their character, and their dreams of using technology to make the world better. At the unveiling ceremony, Sarah spoke to an audience of employees, scholarship recipients, and community leaders. My father believed that everyone deserves a chance to succeed, regardless of where they come from or how much money their family has. He believed that talent and potential exist everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. This scholarship program is designed to provide that opportunity to students who have the drive and vision to change the world, but not the financial means to pursue their education. In creating this program, I'm honoring my father's memory in the way I know would matter most to him by opening doors that would otherwise remain closed. The first class of Mitchell scholars attended the ceremony. 100 incredible young people from across the country, each with a story of overcoming adversity and a dream of making a difference. Sarah met with each of them individually over the course of the day, listening to their stories, offering encouragement, and promising them that Mitchell Technologies would support them not just through college, but throughout their careers. Many of those students cried as they thanked her, overwhelmed by the opportunity they'd been given. Later that night, Sarah sat in her home office, looking at photos from the day. Elena was asleep in the nursery down the hall. James was reading in the living room. The house was quiet and peaceful. Sarah pulled out the letter her father had written her, the letter she'd read 100 times in the years since his death. She read it again now, her eyes lingering on the final paragraph. Live well, my darling girl. Live fully, live joyfully, live with purpose. Make your mark on the world. And know that you were loved, so deeply loved, by both your mother and me. Sarah whispered into the quiet room. I'm doing my best, Dad. I'm living with purpose. I'm making my mark. And I'm teaching Elena to do the same. I hope you're proud. I hope you know that everything I do is to honor you and Mom and the values you taught me. I love you. Always. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in her desk drawer. Then she turned off the light and went to join her husband, feeling at peace in a way she hadn't felt since before her father's death. The pain of losing him would never completely go away, but it had transformed into something else. Motivation, purpose, determination to live a life that would make him proud. And Sarah knew, deep in her heart, that she was succeeding. What did you think of Sarah's incredible journey? From losing everything to uncovering the truth, from fighting for justice to building a legacy that honors her father's memory, Sarah's story shows us that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to fight back, to seek the truth, and to transform tragedy into purpose. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. How would you have handled Sarah's situation? Do you think justice was truly served? And have you or someone you know ever dealt with inheritance fraud or elder abuse? Share your story. Your experience might help someone else who's going through something similar. Now rate this story from 0 to 10. Let me know what you thought. Was it the powerful journey of justice and redemption you were hoping for? And if you believe that truth always finds its way to the surface, that families are worth fighting for, and that one person's determination can change everything, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have more incredible true stories coming your way every week. Thank you so much for watching Sarah's story. Remember, if you're facing a situation where you suspect fraud, abuse, or manipulation of an elderly family member, don't stay silent. Seek help. Contact Adult Protective Services. Consult with an attorney. Hire an investigator if needed. The truth is worth fighting for, and the people you love are worth protecting. Until next time, this is Deep Stories, where every story reminds us that courage, truth, and justice can prevail even against the darkest deception. See you in the next one.